allow me to reintroduce to you my definition of representation. My first definition were my two cousins. They were about 15 years older than me. So I basically grew up watching them. I would watch how they sit, how they eat, how they walk, and how they talk. And another thing that I used to watch was how they always brought A's in every exam. And I remember back then when I was younger, I used to look at them and be like, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. My second definition of representation came from my father's twin brother. He was such a great uncle, and he was just a good person, always patient, and everybody always wanted to be around him. And he was a good husband, and he was a good father, a good brother, a good uncle. And I remember looking at him and saying, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. My third definition of representation came from Maya Angelou. I remember one day I was in German class, and my German teacher came to me and said, Faith, if you could be everything in the world, what would you be? And this was the first time I actually said it out loud. I said, I would like to be a poet. He didn't say much to it, but later I saw him in the corridor, and he came to me and handed me a book from a woman I did not know. Her name was Maya Angelou. And all he said was, Faith, if she can do it, you can. Allow me to introduce to you my personal definition of representation. Representation is that thing that makes you think that if they can do it, I can. I can enter through that door, and I can sit on that table. I can thrive to that height. I came to Germany when I was about 8 years old. Before that, I lived in Harare, Zimbabwe with my family. And there's always one thing my grandma used to say. She used to say, Faith, life, you will mostly understand it looking back, not going forward. Today, when I look back, I realize that I grew up with something a lot of marginalized people didn't grow up with. I grew up with representation. I have a very big family. My dad has about 7 siblings, and my mom has a lot of siblings. So I have a lot of aunties and uncles and cousins. And they represented to me a lot of things. One auntie of mine, she's a judge, all right, like a city judge. And I'm talking about 1998 female judge in Zimbabwe. Another auntie of me, she was actually a teacher at our school. But she was not only a teacher, she was a headmaster. That means she was in charge of the entire school, yeah? And I grew up with, like my uncle I already mentioned, I grew up with my mom. She has 4 kids, now she has 5 kids. She had a dream, and she had a husband, and that's a lot of work. I only have 1 daughter, and I don't have enough sleep, and I do not know how she managed that. And she didn't only manage her family, she also managed a whole hotel. And I was like, wow, I grew up with a lot of representation, not only of what women could do. I grew up with a representation of what people with my skin complexion could do. The first black president I know was not Obama. The first black president I know was a president in Africa, and there are a lot of them, you know. So I remember when Obama got elected, and I was like, yeah, okay, he's a black president. I've heard of black presidents. And I also grew up with the representation of what people with my bloodline can do, with my surname could do. And I remember in school when my mother told us that we are going to move to Germany, right? I was excited, of course. So I went to school and I told all my friends, like, guys, we are moving to Germany. And I was super excited because I wanted to see snow. I didn't even know where Germany was, to be honest. But I wanted to see snow, and I wanted to be surrounded by white people because I didn't know how that was. And I wanted to eat German food. And, you know, I had a whole, imagination of what Germany would be. And all my friends in school, they were just fascinated by the fact that I was going to get on a plane. And I didn't understand that. So I asked one friend of mine, and I was like, dude, why are you so excited about the transportation and you're not excited about the destination of where I'm going? And then she said to me, Faith, you're the first person I know who is ever going to get on a plane. And to me, it was like, wow, because like I have family members who have been on planes every now and then. Like going to the airport was no big deal for me. The airport was close to our home, so like I already know where it was, where I would sit, where I would watch the airplanes go up, and and for her it was totally shocking. I asked her, have you ever been to the airport? She said no. And then I understood, okay, you know what? Faith, what is normal to you is not normal to everybody. Normal depends on the exposure you've had to certain things. Normal depends on how much representation you have had to certain things. All right? So, because when we grow up, we form this whole imagination in our head. We form an entire reality. And that reality in our mind, it tells us whether we belong in certain rooms or not. It tells us whether we belong in certain places or not. It makes us understand what this world is and where we stand in it. All right? And when we do not see ourselves represented in certain places, we'll start believing that something is wrong with us. We'll start believing that we do not belong. We'll start believing that we are wrong, right? And I'm saying that because I have a friend of mine. She's a CEO. She has this great company. And I asked her, well, how is it going? And she said, like, Faith, I started this company, but the first thing I had to do was to prove everybody wrong who said that women cannot lead. And I asked myself, where would all that energy would have gone into if you didn't have to deal with that thing first, right? Because even without representation, there are still a lot of people who are able to believe in themselves, and a lot of people that are able to say, you know what, I can actually do it even though I do not know anybody who could do it. I'm the perfect example for that. Like, I grew up in Germany, I went to school here, and I always wanted to be an author and a poet. And even before my teacher handed me over that book, I was still reading, and I still believed that I somehow could do it. But it takes 7 times of faith to believe such a thing when all the books that you have are Jane Austen books or Rachel Gibson books, women that do not look like you, women that do not represent you. So when Maya Angelou was given to me, I knew I can do this, right? And what I'm just trying to say is that representation is important, first of all. And the second thing I'm trying to say is that there are certain questions that must not be asked anymore. I am actually quoting Annalena Baerbock because she said it first. She said it in her interview. She said, like, we are in a time where certain questions must not be asked anymore because we have people who have answered these questions with their very own lives. And I believe that we are living in such a great time. Look at all the talks that we have had. Look at social media and all these things. We are living in a time that when we are looking for representation, when we are looking for people who can actually represent us and spur up our faith, we can find them. I'm raising a daughter, a black girl in Germany, 2020 born, and I am happy for her. I am happy because she's never going to have to believe with 7 times the energy that I did. Because when she is looking for something that will represent her in a certain area, it's one Google search away. We talked about the negativities of social media, but let's talk about the positive things that social media brings and that the digital age brings. It brings us a lot of answers to questions that we had. We all know that when we have one question, we can actually just go on Google and we have the answer, right? And that is what we have. We have representation. So the call for representation is actually a call for equality. And we've heard that today, that is what we need. We need to be represented in certain rooms. That is exactly what we need, right? We rise, we rise, we rise. As a people, let us create a history in which everybody rises. With no lies, with no lack of portrayal, everybody rises. Just like the moons and the suns and the spring of tides, everybody rises. Just like the springing hope, everybody rises. With no breaking, no hiding, with no fake that is taken, and faith that is stolen, mustard seed, everybody can rise. Out of discrimination, we can rise. Out of racism and sexism, we can rise. As a generation, we have the power and everything that it takes to rise and rise and rise. Thank you.